Next on our agenda is Dr. Walker, and I first heard Dr. Walker earlier this year in Chicago at a conference that I was attending, and I know there are people in the room that have actually heard him speak as well, and you all are in for a really great treat. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Walker first. Your featured speaker today is the Academic Director of the American Dental Association Kellogg's Executive Management Program. He's a former corporate strategist and teaches executive courses in analytics, risk management, strategic, data-driven marketing, and global leadership at the Kellogg School of Management. He has provided executive education programs for Discover Financial Services, the Bank of England, the World Bank, Microsoft, the CME Group, Teradata, SAS, IBM, Bank Austria, the Indian Bankers Association, the American Dental Association, and the Financial Services Roundtable, among others. I'm honored to introduce Dr. Russell Walker.
Thank you, Dr. Armstrong, for the very kind introduction. It's really wonderful to be here with all of you today. What I'd like to talk about is a change that's actually impending in our society and in the world that we can't change, we can't alter, but all we can really do is prepare for it. It gives us a little discomfort because many of the things that are changing are our organizations, our communities, and in fact, even the outlooks that they have. So I'd like to just start with a few definitions, any of the terminology that we'll use, who is a baby boomer, who is a millennial, and then the Gen X even who's between that. So generally speaking, we'll use the following definition, and I think you can all identify where you are. Traditionalists are one that we still forget about, but there are still some small number in the workforce, baby boomers, for whom we worry a lot about because of their impending retirement and impact to social systems and the knowledge that they're going to leave with from the workforce. And then we have two generations that are attracting attention for other reasons, Generation X, and then of course the millennials are so-called Generation Y. And if you're interested, the letters correspond to the generation since the Revolutionary War, so we're at the approximately 25th generation since the start of the United States. A breakdown of these people by age and by number is the following. So you can see the baby boomers are on this cliff where, of course, many of them are also expiring and they're entering retirement. But they're being replaced, and this is the phenomena that is most interesting and we're going to talk about in some detail today. They're largely being replaced by their children in the workplace, which is not unexpected, but this replacement actually has different values. It has different expectations. We're going to talk about those. I teach the millennials, and I can share with you various stories and outlooks that are different, right? And so there is some risk to that, but there's also, I think, an enormous opportunity. We'll also talk a bit about Gen X, which is this generation somehow caught in the middle. Nobody thinks about us. We just go to work, pay taxes, and you guys celebrate the boomers and millennials. But the gray zones, if you're interested, are just sort of the ambiguous transitions between the generations. Now, the generational breakdown has happened, transformation rather, has happened quite quickly. Baby boomers are still a significant part of the workforce in terms of millions of people, but millennials just this year passed them, right, in terms of the percentage of the workforce. So now nearly a third of the workforce is by millennials, and baby boomers associated with retirement, of course, are leaving, exiting the workforce. And that poses tremendous challenges to a lot of organizations, corporations, organizations like yourself, your practices, because you have these people, baby boomers, who've been with you for a very long time. They do have a lot of knowledge. They have perhaps a different sense of norm, and now they're being replaced, right? And that replacement, in many ways, is bringing a new set of values, different set of values. It's not that they're better, of course, that they have a different perspective. Even how an employee views benefits and what a company's commitment to an individual should be has fundamentally been altered. I can tell you students think that a professor's role has changed dramatically, right? And that my role is, well, in part they're correct, is to make them successful. How do I get an A, right? Well, good luck and, hard work are not the answers. I want a step, I want to set a formula, I want to know if I do the following 8 things that I will be successful.
that same perspective they will bring to the workforce. Ask their boss, ask you as an employer, what do I need to do to be successful? And you need to lay that out and, of course, provide them direction and support for that, because, in fact, that's how their whole life has been developed. It results in different priorities. We'll talk about some of this in terms of commitment to work, commitment to work-life balance, and other things outside of work. There are attitudes associated with that and the respect that they expect an employer to have toward their endeavors outside the workforce, and even communication styles. I imagine you live it probably with your children and also with some of your employees, but I don't know why a student thinks that they should text message their professor. I really don't, but they think that's completely acceptable, and that's fine, perhaps in their generation. And I'm really not trying to suggest that I have some sort of separation from them on that norm, but rather it suggests they expect an instant answer. It's not that I'm offended by receiving it, but this really moves toward an entire new set of expectations in a communication. What they have to say, in fact, can be presented as the most important thing on your phone, my phone, and deserves an answer instantaneously. That would not have been something technically we could have done in our generation, and also something that we would not have expected, that we'd call our boss and say, I need an answer instantaneously. Right? There are also rapid changes underway, and so if we just look at what's happened in the last 5 years and what will happen in the next 5 years, baby boomers will continue to move out of the workforce. Generation X is essentially flat. They remain a large part of the workforce, but you can see the transformation is really the movement of baby boomers out. And by 2020, there will be nearly twice as many millennials in the workforce as there are baby boomers. Millennials have had a tough time in some ways, which is perhaps not entirely appreciated by the generations before them. And this may not be the case for all of your children, the millennials that you know, but what I've done here is plotted the unemployment rate by generation. And so you can see millennials, and of course the definition of the millennials changing over that series of time. But if we took that period most recently, going through the financial crisis of 2009, you can see that it was very difficult for them. And of course, this is all millennials. I see the ones who are going to graduate school, and thankfully they do get jobs, and I'm sure those that are going to dental schools get jobs as well. One wonders if they're fully employed, that is to say, could their achievement of a salary be higher? But they have experienced early in their career, some financial stress, compounded by the horrific stories of student loan debt, which is another kind of issue in society. I do a little financial calculation class for our students, since I teach risk and analytics, and I guess no one's really done this for their benefit. So I say, let's build a spreadsheet. Let's put in your salary. You're going to get a job. You make $150, great. And let's give the government their cut, and let's give the landlord their cut, and everyone else all the other expenses. And come to find out, you've got this student loan debt. An MBA student might have $50 left over per day to work with, or less. And they look at me in shock. I'm like, there's got to be a mistake. I'm like, oh, no, I don't think so. The spreadsheet worked just fine. I'm guessing you haven't actually looked at it this way. And the student loan debt is horrific, right, for many of them. I had a young lady who came to me and said, well, could we do the spreadsheet over? She said, I've got $250,000 from Stanford undergrad, and $200,000 from graduate school. So $450,000, which may not be a lot to dentists, but that is an enormous debt burden to have coming out of college. And so you can appreciate that it alters your perspective, right? And in fact, what you need out of a job, and perhaps even what you just need to live. So, and they still remain associated with that red line, significantly more underemployed than other generations. They will be 50% of the workforce in the next 5 years. And currently, because of the recession, they still experience financial and employment challenges. Associated with that are that baby boomers, largely tied to their desire to stay in the workforce, success in the workforce, their desire to grow their retirement portfolio, are delaying retirement. They're going to hang around and spend some more time, right? And you say, well, it certainly works that way in academia. The 80-year-old professor is still hanging out. And you say, well, when's the younger one get to take over and say, not till they take me out, right? So those kind of challenges are at work. There's an enormous amount of work that's been done by some leading groups. Some of this comes from Deloitte, some of this comes from an organization, Pew Institute of Demographic Studies. And so they look at what different demographic groups, demographic trends in America are, and they surveyed recently a lot of individuals by generation, and not surprisingly, millennials identify themselves as technically very aware. Of course, every generation thinks they invented pop culture, and that they're the most tolerant and liberal. And then, of course, if you look at Generation X, that being someone in, say, mid-40s, they have similar perspective, but perhaps, somewhere in between that and a baby boomer, right? And the baby boomer identifies himself largely with a strong work ethic that's to be rewarded and to be acknowledged, right? And there's a big difference here, okay? And it may offend some people who say, yes, the value of work ethic is really high, showing that you come to work every day and working hard and long hours, that's part of being successful. A millennial would say, let's just look at the results. If it took you 8 hours to do what I could do in 2 hours, well, I must be smarter about it. So 2 hours is better than 8. And those clashes in generations are happening right now in the workforce, right? And then so that kind of misalignment, if you would, is something you have to be aware of. The millennial generation expects to be rewarded for output, not for input, not for showing up, not for hours. In fact, they'd like to work from Starbucks and work from home, and will probably take a pay cut to do so. Your practices may not permit that, but for lots of enterprises where you're knowledge workers, remote working or working from home is naturally the wave of the future. A little bit more about the millennials. They're 90 million currently, largest age group ever in the history of the United States. So when the baby boomers were produced, of course, their parents came back from the war, their fathers did anyhow. These are the grandchildren largely of the war, and there's never been a group bigger, right? Technologically savvy. It's interesting to put this in some perspective. It's the first generation to grow up with the internet through their entire life, ubiquitously, right? And so that they're almost every day on social media, probably every hour, and their career expectations, as measured by Monster, are different. Previous to coming to Kellogg to teach, I worked at a bank, Capital One, and I saw the first wave, I guess, of millennials coming in while I was there. And I remember we interviewed this gentleman, brilliant, and in the interview he said, well, I only expect to be here 18 to 24 months, right? And he was very, candid about it, and which I found, more shocking than even his outlook. But that outlook is very consistent with the generation, right? That they see their role as probably temporary, and they're going to move, and at least half of them see that opportunity as one that just opens another door, right? And you might find that challenging, you might find it offensive, but it's part of reality, right? And so your parents or your generation where you said, I'm going to be here for many, many years, that's certainly not what they're looking for. They also believe that career advancement is something that they're entitled to. And so National Institute of Health did an analysis on this also as well, and they said that it should not as much be linked to your performance, but more your contribution, right? So that you're part of the team, and that you as an employer have a responsibility to advance and develop that associate, that individual, and largely firms are responsible for that. And I sort of story, with the students say, hey, how do I get an A? I have to give them that formula, right? They expect that level, and where does that come from? It comes from a very close relationship with their parents, a very deep relationship. In fact, I've encountered it a few times in the corporate world and also as a professor where surprisingly you get a phone call, from the mom. Hi, I'd like to talk about, Sally's homework or her, final grade. Say, no, ma'am, we don't do that. That's a private matter, and I discuss it with a student. Well, she and I talk about everything. I said, well, that's great. Maybe she should share her annual review with her, with you, right? And so this expectation that they can interject their parents, the column of support, if you would, that they've had for their entire life, whenever there's some complexity, they haven't removed that entirely. We see that in the corporate space. In fact, many consulting companies that hire not MBA students, rather hiring undergraduates, so these are companies, say like a Deloitte, who hires many people, and for these students, it's their first job ever. They have Parents' Day. Come in, this is what a contract will be with your daughter or son. These are our benefit packages. This is what we do. This is what we don't do, to educate that. Universities even have the same, right? So you bring your child to school, and what will the university do and what will they not? Because the relationship between those two, the student and the parent, is very strong. You might find that in the workforce as well. It also suggests, and I think this is an enormous opportunity, right, is that they're really hungry for mentorship, and they're really hungry for leadership and guidance, because that's what they've gained from their parents and they've grown to expect. And whereas many times perhaps corporate America has not focused on that. They've focused on, here are your tasks, as opposed to, here's what you could work on and here's how I could help you. Those are opportunities, right? And so managers, supervisors should focus on that. Daily or weekly challenges, posting tasks not simply as, here's your to-do, but here are things I would like for you to help us do better. And so one of the things that millennials do bring, of course, is a particular technological savvy, a look to problems perhaps through innovation. They look at it and say, how can I get it done faster, quicker, remove hours, all those kind of things that indeed are benefits. And if you post the tasks in that manner, then perhaps it's not viewed so much as a to-do list, but more as, here's an opportunity for me to contribute and make the place better. And of course, I guess everyone has this, an ego, and perhaps theirs has been fueled by being, likely from a single child family or only 2 children in a family, and that has brought a lot of attention and a particular expectation of recognition, right? And so you can appreciate if for your whole life you've been told, hey, you're the best and you're great, and you did go to school and you learned, lots of things and got good grades, and this is sort of the trajectory of my students. And then you get to graduate school or you get to work and someone says, yeah, you're average, right? And then they're like, well, it can't be me. It's got to be them, right? Because it's been my whole life, And so there you go. There's a rub there, right? And so then it's very difficult to develop a relationship, a useful working relationship there. I think putting that in perspective, that for them success has been programmed. And this is especially true for the ambitious, college-going, probably your children. You've sent them to private schools, to great schools, and focused them on grades and focused them on probably even graduate school and empowering them. And you go to soccer practice and, well, it's not even a game, but you got some kind of medal at the end of practice, right? So everything was recognized. Everyone was celebrated. I'm not challenging that, and I'm not suggesting that that's wrong. But that naturally has created a new set of expectations, and one that we in the workforce have to be prepared for. The relationship with parents is there, as I mentioned, and the structure in their lives, right? As I mentioned, what's my formula? How do I get promoted? What do I need to do here to be higher, ranked or paid? They also question authority, maybe not in the anarchy way, but they're really looking to improve things. Why do we do it this way? Couldn't we do it easier? Couldn't we do this online? Could we do it with an app? Could we do it in some other manner which reduces time and reduces complexity? And I think in that manner, that questioning of authority, that they're really there prodding to understand more the justification as opposed to questioning the position of authority. What I do think is refreshing about them, and perhaps generations before didn't stand up enough on this, is that they really do expect employers to accommodate them more also as a customer, right? And what I mean by this is not that, okay, I've got a job, you pay me to do a job and I provide services, but that they also view the relationship with the employer as one that requires some nurturing. And that is very similar to, how do I get better? How do you help me, maybe professionally, but personally, training, development, all the other things. I have feedback for you as the employer. Here are things that you could do differently. Wow. That didn't happen a generation or two before, right? And so that you would respond to that, and you should respond to make the work, better and more enjoyable. I think the enormous opportunity, and there are, of course, so many people in generations X and baby boomers who do the same, but overall they're much more comfortable with technology, interacting with it, solving problems through it, and using that in a networked approach inevitably to solve challenges in the workplace, to work with associates, to collaborate with them. I find personally some challenges, and that, as I mentioned with the communication norms, one of them that comes up almost every Sunday during the academic year is the following, because I teach a Monday class, and so inevitably some student will wait until Sunday to do their homework, that is, wait an entire week, and then they'll send me an email. Dear professor, your directions are unclear. Therefore, I'm unable to successfully complete the homework. Sign, your millennial student. And I'm thinking, listen, because you had a problem doesn't mean I have a problem. And so what is very clever about this, and it's happened so many times, I believe that it is a norm of expectation in communication, is transfer of responsibility. In that student's context, they say, well, I did what was expected of me, you did not do what I expected of you, therefore the delinquency, if you would, is on you. And you think, well, that doesn't work that way in the corporate world. You can't go to a client and say, I'm sorry, you didn't do your part, so, project's over, right? And so, but nevertheless, this notion that they're constantly connected, they want constant feedback. And of course, I get this email at 11 o'clock at night on a Sunday, and then I don't respond. They're like, did you get my email? I'm like, no, I do email at lunchtime. But, that creates a set of misaligned expectations that you have to be aware of, is that they see the boundary differently than we would have, right? We likely would have said, I'm going to do my best and turn it in, or I'm going to go see the professor, 3 days before it's due. And so those types of challenges I think you're going to continue to see in a very big way. The millennial outlook to employers, and this is where your associates, and since you also have patients, they will of course show some of this, but clinically it might be different. What do they want their boss to do? Navigate my career path. Wow, was that ever something that you expected of your boss? And when you got a job, that the boss is going to help you become successful? No, you got a paycheck, you got a job, right? And so it will give you straight feedback, constant and regular feedback, how they can improve, sponsored development programs, comfortable with flexible schedules. I find this personally very comforting to know that individuals in society are incorporating more flexible schedules. We, as faculty, work a lot from home and have a lot of flexibility at what we do, which is tremendous. And even in the corporate world, we began to experiment with that. And when we did, we had a work from home program, and I thought, man, this is going to be bad. You don't see your boss, the boss doesn't see you, that's not good. And you know what? It worked out great. I didn't want to see my boss either, So, everything was fine. And actually, companies are looking to that not simply because it rewards associates and gives them flexibility, but it dramatically reduces the cost of real estate and the cost of operating an enterprise. And so, looking at that, and that's actually one of the things when a millennial or some generation says, hey, I'd like this, before you decline it thinking that's offensive, that's too much to ask for, really ask yourself, is it that much to ask for? What am I really giving up? And in some companies, one of them most notably JetBlue, the airline, they hire a lot of young people, of course, and so they ask for lots of things, extra days off, vacation, flexibility in the days they work, and if you work for them, they have a series of compensation packages, more or less a pot of money, and you get to allocate that against different compensation targets. If you want more vacation, you want more insurance, or more flexibility in your schedule, those things all. And it's not that they're paying more. It's that they're providing that choice. They're providing that direction and that liberty to their associates to make those decisions. And that's really important, that they feel, their associates feel, and indeed have that power. And you can see a lot of these other skills that they want in a company, that the company's going to develop me. Additionally, that the company has strong values. And this is perhaps from a values perspective, not just values ethos, but sort of some of it even political, that the company should take a stand on various issues. And of course, for what you do in dentistry, you have enormous sense of value around ethics and caring for people. So that seems like a natural alignment. But it wouldn't strike me as discordant if associates said, well, we should do something for the environment. This office wastes, paper or plastics or something, right? And then all of a sudden, you've got an associate who says, we should do something. Maybe you should. Is it hard to do that? Is there a cost to that necessarily? Maybe not, right? And so before you look at it and say, yeah, I'm going to disregard it, I think it's worth just examining it and say perhaps it's a way to engage a member, to engage an associate in a deeper way. And then, of course, they very much want the company to develop their skills, technical skills. When we look at what they look for in a company, the very first one there is opportunities for career progression, even more so than financial pay, right? And then they want excellent training and flexible work arrangements, and it's fascinating, right? So naturally they want pay, and they're ambitious, and they did go to school and push to get A's and work really hard and all those types of things, but in the workforce they expect more. They expect more than just that. And also this commitment that they're going to be supported and nurtured in a way. They won't use that language, of course, but that kind of direction and leadership is important to them. And then, of course, some of the factors in choosing a job, the opportunity, the reputation of the firm, the role itself, right? So they look to the company, and I think this is a tremendous opportunity for dentists because of what you do. You take care of people. Implicitly, you have a sense of value, you have a sense of calling, right? When you work for a bank that does subprime lending, that's not exactly so easy to pull off, right? So, now, nevertheless, we sold it somehow, okay? But providing them that kind of clarity, you're making an impact. You're helping society or people. I think that's a tremendous contribution that you can offer. Work-life balance is a really fascinating one, and it comes up in surprising ways. So at Kellogg, we have a large number of students who go to work for what we call the consumer packaged good industry. These are companies like Kraft and Nestle, Coca-Cola and PepsiCo. They make the products that we ingest, of course. And so one of the big ones, of course, is Kraft, and they're headquartered in the suburbs of Chicago. And so as illustrious as that is for a young MBA student, a brand manager, managing Kraft macaroni and cheese or something like that, last year, 12 students who received offers from Kraft all got together and told Kraft, we don't want to work out in Northfield, in the suburbs. You need to open an office in downtown Chicago, in Wicker Park, which is kind of the trendy place to be if you're a hipster, or we're not going to go to work there. And I thought, wow, you guys, you formed a consortium, or, if you appreciate The Godfather, a mafia, and you hit the boss up for a pinch, and you didn't get a pay increase. You got a remote office. And for Kraft, this is really easy. They need young people to tell them what the new flavors, the new designs, whatever it is in the world will be. They said, oh yeah, you want me to rent some space in Wicker Park? Not a problem. What's that, $5,000 a month or something? Easy, okay? It may not be easy for you to relocate your office, right? But in that case, it was simple. Where I looked at it, I'm like, wow, you could have renegotiated your rate, all sorts of other things. But for them to live in that area, to be part of that urban environment, was that important to them, right? And so that's where this clash, this misalignment of values can come up. And I think Kraft got it right, not simply because they were trying to accommodate, but Kraft has a goal. And that goal includes in having those millennials and their contribution at the company. They value mentorship. And I think this is a tremendous opportunity for dentists where inevitably you're aligned around an owner, a practitioner, an expert, somebody who's dedicated their career to taking care of people, indeed has developed an expertise and a following, and a younger person who doesn't have that and seeks that. Leverage that, provide that, make time for that. Not, I'm going to allow you to watch me. Have 15 minutes a day. Here's what we did today. Here's what you did today. Let's talk about it. What made you uncomfortable about the procedure? What did you see? What was different? What can I tell you? You can do that for free. And the value that they will assign to that is enormous. It could be the difference in keeping someone. It could be the difference in growing someone from a junior dentist into a partner and them taking over the practice from you, right? So that kind of outreach, if you would, that inquiry, that little bit of time, will make a really big difference. And of course, showing, and you have to take a position that this is important, that you operate with ethical business practices, right? So we saw a tremendous downturn coming out of the recession, not just Kellogg, but Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. A lot of students said, I don't want to go to work for investment banks, in spite of the fact that they pay, top dollar. I don't like what they did going into the recession. Really? You'd rather go work for a, startup? Yep, I would, and I'd like to, help change the world, and, that's part of what they'd like to do. They'd like a company to address society's challenges, right? And so that's going to be very specific and unique. You do it in some way by providing health care, but as I've mentioned, you might have associates say we should take a stand on other issues. You might want to be cautious, of course, about how it impacts your firm's reputation, but it's not necessarily incompatible, right? That there are likely ways that you could do that. They like to show that they're improving society, and you do on a daily basis. Leverage that, demonstrate that, communicate that, and your offer. What do we do? What will you be able to do by joining this firm, this practice, right? And perhaps not so modestly, they want to leave their mark on the world, and they'll likely tell you this, and they want to say, we made the place better, I'm the one who did the following, I created this new logo, I changed this process, and set them free. Let them have some latitude. Let them work on problems that they see, opportunities that they see, where they can innovate and in fact grow their skills. They do look for innovation in the organization, and an organization that thinks creatively. They're not looking for you necessarily to provide them answers, but they do want latitude so that they can grow that. They do want the managerial attitude to be supportive of that. I think this is perhaps one of the easiest changes. If someone says, I'd like to change how we do the billing, I'd like to change how we do any of these processes. You say, well, build a case for it. Show us how it would be better, right? And so on that front, it offers a challenge. It offers them an opportunity to be creative, to innovate, and then also to bring an idea to the enterprise where they can own, they can say, I made a difference. They think people should be encouraged to change the way things are done, right? They see their role as one that is a change agent, and they also want the opportunity to be nurtured, to grow as a leader, right? And so, again, I think a wonderful opportunity in a practice where you have an identified leader, an expert. Interestingly, they'll spend all day on social media, but they frequently like to work independently, right? And this notion of, I'm going to be in front of my computer screen, or I'm doing my independent task, and I realize in a practice this may not map naturally, but in terms of knowledge workers, you work at a bank, you work at a consumer packaged good company, you have a series of activities to do. Don't be looking over my shoulder. Don't micromanage me. I will get it done, but reward me for my product, not for my process. Generation X, which is my generation, and of course probably many of you here in the room, we don't get talked about, which is interesting. We were sort of the downturn in the population growth cycle. There are about 50 million of us. There are a few things unique about Generation X to keep in mind. We were the first generation in the history of the United States that widely had mothers go to work, right? That altered lots of things. Probably the outlook for girls in terms of working outside the home, which is probably very good, of course. And then also lots of challenges at the home front, right? First generation to have widespread divorce in their parents. Frequently, Generation X had to be independent because of that, because you might be in a single-parent home, or you might not have your mom at home, or your mom might not be doing what your grandmother would have done in terms of preparation of everything at home. Of course, we grew up with computers, though not as ubiquitously as millennials. And of course, many things changed in our lifetime, right? Phones and communication norms became different. And then, of course, many of us, research suggests that we pursue jobs because of their value and their intellectual stimulation. But some things were different, right? We do look for flexibility and freedom in the workplace, but not right out of the gate. That happened later, right? Largely once Generation X had kids and realized that employers and corporate America had never really answered the question, what do we do when the moms go to work too? How do we balance all the responsibilities of work and life? And so this generation dealt with it and probably accepted an unreasonable set of expectations from companies, and now, of course, are asking for more flexibility. Also, and probably you can remember this in the late 80s, more so, I guess, mid-80s, early 80s, and then, of course, early 90s, a lot of companies downsized. And Generation X was perhaps the first to see their parents lose a job after being in a job for a long period of time. And if you think about grandparents and great-grandparents, they didn't have that. The U.S. had, quite a bit of expansion, other than, say, the Great Recession, but there were periods that we experienced, this economic challenge, and this economic challenge was tied to, your mom or your dad lost their job. And so that changed what a lot of anthropologists, sociologists think about Gen X, And so Gen X also has experienced some problems economically. They're in their prime earning years, and the recession was not kind to them. Many of them lost jobs and, of course, remain underemployed. Lower net worth is an issue for them as they move toward retirement, even though that's some decades off. They are also caught in a dilemma where they're raising children, but they're taking care of or maybe taking care of baby boomer parents or older parents who are staying at home or need special care or did not have success in their retirement portfolio. So you're in that 40, 50-year-old range, and you say, I'm taking care of 3 generations, right? That's going to be financially very challenging. Also, a higher expectation to pay for children's college. I hear this from a lot of my colleagues, and of course in academia we are also focused on sending our children to school and all that kind of goal. But you look at the bill now, right? I mean, you go to private school at 4 years is $250,000. And you think, wow, can I take that burden away from my child? And you want to build your retirement package, and then you're simultaneously trying to pay for that kind of liability in the future. And the first generation, subject to political qualms, I guess, that will not likely have Social Security or significant pensions, right? I mean, Generation X is the one where you got your 401k. That didn't happen the generation before. And so a few things that were different for Generation X. We had to-do lists, right? Your mom or dad made a list, and here are the things you had to do. We had blended families. What I mean by that are step-parents, and so associated with increased social acceptance for divorce, of course, and the fact that it happened. And of course, they were brought up in the shadow of largely very influential family members. The first time in society that families downsized. So I would imagine if we all reflected on the size of families and you said, well, maybe your mom had 3 kids, and your grandmothers had 6, okay, and your great-grandmothers had 8 or something like that. That kind of trajectory was very common for the U.S. This is the first time that as a generation, more or less, mothers had less children, and that was largely associated with working, right? It's a phenomena that happens across the world. They saw their parents sacrifice a lot for careers and not necessarily get back what they thought was a fair deal. And so the research that a lot of anthropologists and sociologists have is that Gen X is independent, resilient, but cynical. And they have, a certain question, is this going to happen to me? Am I going to get this mistreatment in the end, right? And literally, they're in the middle. They're in the middle in terms of various other values, ethnically, racially composition. They're somewhere between baby boomers and millennials. Religious affiliations also in the middle. The age at which they married is somewhere in the middle. This is very different for millennials. They're marrying at a lower rate and at an older age. And so the prospect for them to form families or to form larger families, of course, is declining. And in even graduation, high school graduation and such, you can see Generation X is tracking almost in between both of these. We should say a little bit about baby boomers because they're still a significant part of the workforce and will be for some period of time. They're about 75 million. One piece of evidence suggests that on the order of 10,000 are retiring per week, and so there will likely be many less here in the next few years. And a big issue to them largely is that they experienced an economic downturn in their retirement portfolio at the worst time, right? And so hopefully, if that happened to you, you put your money back into equities because they've come back. If you got scared and you went into bonds, that was really bad. Anyhow, I'm not here to give financial advice, but still time to reinvest and to grow your portfolio. Some evidence suggests that this generation, to recover that, might need an additional 13 years of working, which is almost impossible. It means that they have to reformulate their expectations. Obviously, working longer is one of those, downsizing their expectations in retirement, their lifestyle, and of course, health issues become really important as you become older, and of course, the temptation, the desire rather, to remain independent, and that can often lead to clashes with your children and financial dilemmas. The cost of retirement is very high. And of course, one of the things that they feel uncomfortable with, and it makes sense in many ways, is the giving up of their role, giving up their authority, right? Seeing someone else take over that before they're ready to do that. And so when they're surveyed, many of the things that come out is that they view their contribution as really solid work ethic. I'm dependable, reliable, I've done this for 30 years, and because of that, I know what's best. And that, of course, you can see the ultimate challenge and clash with someone who's younger who says, hey, I saw a different way to do it. In fact, my way's better. Let me show you the results. And so inevitably, that has some latitude of misalignment. And of course, they do consider themselves highly productive and dedicated and see those as attributes that should be acknowledged and rewarded. Fair enough, right? And they communicate in groups. They like that kind of group consensus building. They may be seen as authoritarian by younger generations. And if you in this baby boomer generation, and you think, what are the things that I could do to better receive younger generations? Perhaps just alter how you speak, right? Ask what someone else thinks before telling them what you think. That goes a long, long way, right? And we in academia have the same challenge. And so when you alter that, just the sequence of those questions, then you're perceived as much more open, much more participatory, and they see your role not one as telling them what to do, but looking to them for ideas, and then you can offer that mentorship. Then you can offer your thoughts, right? And of course, I think there's a natural pairing here. As challenging as it may seem on the surface, it actually makes perfect sense, as if you want to do mentorship, you want to do coaching and development, your greatest knowledge base is the baby boomers. And so leveraging them to work with Generation X, and particularly millennials, I think is fantastic. Now, success with multiple generations, it's not that you have just one generation in the workforce, as we might say in the classroom. You have all of these working simultaneously. So you might think creatively about reward strategies. What do your millennials want? What do your baby boomers want? Like the JetBlue example. How will you pick your reward packages from some pot of money? It's not just about cash. There may be other goals. You want to take off Friday? Great. We have a program for that. It's called 20% less pay, okay? And there you go, all right? So that's important to you, all right? That's what we call it, right? And then, vast majority of people, they're looking for prospects and their benefits, right? And, they want to alter those. They want to know that they have control over that. And they want to be personally involved and see that their input led to the decision that was made. This is becoming easier because you likely work with some HR company or a company who provide you a set of packages, and there is indeed some latitude there, and so providing them that, I think, is great. Millennials love to solve problems, show that they made it better, streamline it, take cost out, take time out, make it technologically more sophisticated. Great. Set them up on task to do that. Provide them those challenges. Give them that creativity. You might even have to alter how they're working so that some of their time is to look at those activities in a sort of skunk works project way to say, you've got some time to help us get better and do things, or research things. Are there partners we should be working with? Could we find a better partner, supplier, what have you? Okay? And this is the one that never ends, and it can be a little uncomfortable at first, I'll be honest, is they love feedback, right? Constant, regular feedback. And so I'll share with you, my students, I send them an email after they get their homework, and I write in, here's what you did well, here's what you didn't do well, and of course, here's your final grade. I know they read that stuff right away. I mean, they'll fire back a response within 30 seconds, right? Oh, thank you so much for the detailed feedback. Other people don't give me this. That's so helpful, right? And so it's not hard to do. It's a little discomforting at first, as I mentioned, is the level of detail that you might provide, but someone in the workforce needs that, right? They expect that, and they'll respect you for providing that. They also expect and respect you giving them latitude. Let them do something without telling them exactly how to do it, right? And within your membership and growing your society, you might think about that. What does a secretary or treasurer or president of Young Members Association, what should they do? Maybe let them figure it out for a little bit, right? And come back with what they think the priorities would be. They like flexible work schedules. I think everybody does, but they are willing, as I mentioned, to trade that for pay in some ways. They encourage and want you to provide them learning opportunities, mentorships, and they really believe, and this is a challenge to organizations probably like yours, who say, we value tenure, right? And academia is the worst at this. You've been here 20 years, you get to be president. You've been here 30 years, you get to be, whatever. Okay, run for 88. They would look at that and say, no, I mean, if I'm going to be involved, I want to get involved quickly, I want to make a difference, I want to be in a leadership role, I want results, I want to be able to contribute and not wait in line. And so that might be a challenge to an organization where you say, hey, the trajectory has a certain tenure, open up a new line. Maybe there's a line for younger members or other initiatives that they might be able to work on. Okay? There are a lot of things that you could do to leverage this wave. Make it part of your success in business. They're your customers, they're your employees, they're even your children. You help make this happen. Thank you so much. And encourage and welcome dialogue and regular feedback. Have a sit down with them weekly. How'd it go this week? What worked well? What didn't? Right? Ask them before you tell them. I saw you do the following. Right? Save that for second. Right? And because they may accept it first. They might acknowledge it, and conversation can go much more easily because of that. Help them with their development. Ask them what they think their development needs are. Provide opportunities for advancement. Those can be small steps. It's not that everyone is going to become, the owner and the head of the practice. So, someone comes into your practice at an entry level. How do you show that you have advanced them in some capacity? They get to learn a new piece of equipment. They get to go to a program. Maybe they get to come here or some other kind of class, right? That can be in small steps, and that's in fact what companies are doing. It sounds a little insincere, I know, and you think, hey, we just expected to go from manager to director to VP. Well, companies are just putting a whole bunch of titles in between. And those titles have different recognition, and even they have different pay. May not be big, but a couple $100, people feel like I was recognized, right? Even spot bonuses companies do. Hey, you did a great job. So, I put an extra $200 in your paycheck this week. Okay? At the end of the day, it doesn't really kill the finances of your firm, but the message to the employee is tremendous. The recognition is tremendous, right? And then, consider the request, because frequently they're not expensive requests. They're not even unreasonable. It's that your generations, our generations, might initially view them as unfair. We would have never asked for that. How dare you? Set that attitude aside. Just say, well, what's your justification for this? How would we do it? How would we balance it with the other things that we have to do? And in fact, I think you'll see that many of those work brilliantly. And then for Generation X, please show us a little love, right? I mean, everybody forgets us. We're unappreciated. We're taking care of our parents and our children and, working and paying taxes. So, there are a lot of other issues. Family dynamics, I think, are really big. And so they're at that stage in life where literally they have 3 generations. And so how do you help them with that? Workplace flexibility is enormous, right? And they probably have to take kids to school and pick them up and all those other things. And so, this was the first generation to try it. First generation where, like I said, where mom, went to work. So I guess just help, right? It's reasonable. For baby boomers, I think there are many things. They may feel that rules and tradition are the way things are done. Unfortunately, the generations after them don't really see it that way, right? And so as valuable as those may be in their context, companies, organizations now have to be, inclusive and look to results, not just how we do things in the past. But I really do think you can elevate baby boomers by showing that they can be the most valued resource to mentor and coach and advise younger members. And I think they would love doing it. I do think there's some subtleties about how you would have them do it so it doesn't sound authoritarian and slightly offensive. As I mentioned, what do you think versus what I think? And I think pairing them, even individually, if in your workplace or in your organization, Dr. Armstrong mentioned, hey, we have new dentists today. Well, I imagine there are many things that they'd like to achieve in their career. Where would they go for guidance and support and ideas? Maybe they could be appointed a mentor informally. You get together for lunch. You go see a practice for a half a day or something like that. I don't mean to tell you how to do it, but rather that mentorship alignment, I think, is a very natural one that benefits both sides. Simultaneous to this change in generations that we're experiencing in the U.S. is a change in ethnicity. That change is surprisingly dramatic and also surprisingly undiscussed in the media. probably don't need to tell you this here in Austin, Texas, since you've lived with so much diversity here, particularly with Hispanics. But this is the breakdown of self-identified ethnic groups by the U.S. Census Bureau. Now, I'm Hispanic, and I wouldn't necessarily use some of these words, white and black and Hispanic, and most Hispanics would say they're Latino. That's a whole different topic, but we'll save that for another day. But nevertheless, you can see the U.S. Census Bureau, as coarse as it is in its measurement of our ethnicity or race, we see this massive explosion of Hispanics, tremendous growth also from a percentage basis in multiracial families, African Americans growing as well, so that those who consider themselves white, which is not entirely clear to me, but you know, that identification as the U.S. Census Bureau, that's just about half the population today. And in the coming years will be less than the majority. And if we look at where these people live, and I love maps because they really tell us a tremendous amount about the world, those people who identify themselves as non-white in the last U.S. Census of 2010, you can see, of course, Texas, Florida, California, three of the most populous states, have that dimension, right? And so your customers, your clients, your associates, they're not the same people they were 30 years ago or even 10 years ago. And that's happening in a big way. The biggest movement, percentage and number-wise, as I mentioned, is in Hispanics. And it's interesting to put this in perspective. These circles represent the cities that have the largest Hispanic populations. 1 in 6 Americans is now Hispanic, right? And I'm sure here in Texas you have a history and comfort with that, but there are a lot of places where this is new. Indianapolis, Indiana, Charlotte, North Carolina. The highest growth cities for Hispanic populations are not Texas, Florida, and California. They're in other states, right? And so this movement, repopulation, if you would, of Hispanics in cities where they have not been, that's happening in a tremendous way and will not stop, right? The Asian population is tremendously concentrated in urban areas. It's still a relatively small part of the U.S. population, but if you work in an urban area, and I suspect here in Austin with the university, there's a significant concentration here, as there are in many of those kind of communities. The African American population is most strong in the South, but also in urban areas. And so those modifications, those movements, if you would, are going to continue, and they're going to change who we are, and where we are in the United States, and how we identify as individuals. And that change is also happening around the world in many different ways. This map is a map of the country's population that is urban. Okay, so this number for the U.S., 246 million, is the percent that's urban. About 81% of the United States is considered urban. And it's interesting that we don't look at the rest of the world in the same way. Brazil is actually more urban than the United States. They do, of course, have jungles, but they don't live in the jungles. They tear them down and build a little town next to the jungle. And, of course, Europe is slightly less urbanized than the U.S., but what's fascinating about this is 2 of the growth engines in the world, China and India, are highly, highly unurbanized. This is the growth of the world ahead of us. When we think about world GDP expansion, we think about imports, exports, all the things, this is where it's going to happen. India and China offer tremendous opportunity for that. They will have more people moving to urban areas, so these black circles represent mega cities that are forming, cities of 10 million or more. So you can see North America will have 2 or 3 mega cities. For China, that there'll probably be 7 or 8, right? And so this movement to highly urbanized centers will change how we live. It'll change a lot of things. And some of the research I do is actually in how this impacts the food supply and what we eat. And a lot of research suggests that Americans' trend toward a meat-based diet is going to be repeated in other countries. I do some work with the Harvard School of Public Health and the Culinary Institute of America. They have a program that examines this, and as individuals around the world achieve wealth around $5,000 US per year, it's not a lot to us, but it is significant in many parts of the world, they move to a meat-based diet. And that alters their need for a refrigerator. They need a pig. Now that pig needs to have soybeans, and soybeans need to have land and water. And so you can see the implications to this around the world are very dramatic. If you take India and China and you say, well, they're going to look something like Europe or Brazil in terms of urbanization, the world has an enormous change ahead of it. And that will largely involve these mega cities. This is just another map from the UN Population Division that looks at where these mega cities will be. Curiously, if you were to take a circle somewhere in Thailand that encompasses India and coastal China, that circle will contain more than half the world's population, right? And that circle is only about 1,500 miles, 2,000 miles in radius. I love the fact that globalization is a reality, and this map captures it in many ways. So these areas that are light are areas that can be connected in less than 2 days by air freight, right? So you think about, you buy something, it can be in China, put into a box, shipped across the ocean by plane, and at your house in less than 2 days. And so we're really connected. We're connected in ways that require people to move. And I appreciate that here in Texas, you're literally at the frontier of that. And this map is a map of countries that receive and give up workers. Red circles, large red circles, are those countries that receive more immigrants. And that, of course, is the U.S. and its relationship with much of Latin America. And you can see the large blue circle for Mexico. But you can see this problem at work in Europe. Europe is aging very, very rapidly, and there are no babies to replace the old people. And so where will the workers come from? Well, they're going to come from North Africa. They're trying to get there by ship, of course. There's a lot of human tragedy from Central Asia, China, India. So we have this interesting phenomenon in the world that we have wealthy countries like the U.S. and regions like Europe that are aging, and we have people, a surplus of people, in poorer countries. And so the temptation, the need for them to somehow immigrate or be integrated in the workforce is ahead of us. Demographically, it really is brought into focus when we look at what we call the population pyramid. So this is a traditional way of looking at the distribution of men and women by age groups. So this is from the U.S. Census Bureau, and we do it in 5-year increments. So that's, newborns to 4, so that counts newborn as the year before 1. And so this is, our population pyramid, and that little bulge, that's the baby boomer bulge, right? And you look at it and you say, well, it doesn't look that bad. In a few years there'll be less of them, and it'll kind of work itself out. Maybe that's true. But there are some problems that we have experienced with post-baby boomer. So I'll share with you that I'm part of this little contraction here. I'm sure some in this room are as well. Early 70s, where, as I mentioned, women went to work for the first time in a large way. There was an economic crisis, energy crisis in North America. That was a problem. And I'll share with you a little personal story. I went to a Catholic all-boys high school in Tampa, Florida. Man, it was so much fun. And when we got there, we're 13-year-old boys. The father gets up, the priest, and he says, boys, because that's how he talked to us, right? Want to let you know there weren't enough of you born last year, so we let some of you in that we wouldn't have in previous years. I remember that till today. And I thought, wow, this is so welcoming. I think the next 4 years are going to go great. And anyhow, I can't wait to leave. He was right. And you know what's also right? Universities are going to start shutting down. They already are. Dental schools have shut down, for other cost reasons. There will be some organizations that just don't have enough people to keep them viable. Don't become one of those, okay? And so that contraction, we had a little recovery, but actually the newspapers covered this just last year. The U.S. population growth rate just actually equilibrated after the most recent crisis. Families didn't have kids. So, we returned to neutral conditions. So for a period of 4 or 5 years, we were actually losing people by death more than we were replacing them by birth. We've recovered that, which is not really stable, okay? And now the U.S. has an enormous amount of immigration, which is not entirely measured. We don't know how many immigrants might be here entirely. So the situation may be a little better than we think, but that's our population pyramid. Let's look at a few other countries around the world that I believe can change the world. One of them is India. Does anyone see the problem here? Yeah, all boys. Now, and I started researching demography and how this affects countries and companies. I got really interested, so I dove into this, and I said, well, what is the natural split between boys and girls? It's surprisingly not 50-50. And so for reasons that scientists cannot entirely explain, in a population of, say, 1,000 births, we would expect a surplus of maybe 10 boys. That's not what's going on here, okay? This is infanticide against young girls, of course. And of course, it's illegal technically in India, but that loss of women is dramatic. And I give a talk every year in India, and when I do, there's always a gentleman, older gentleman, who'll stand up and say, "Professor, the solution's very easy. We will bring our women from somewhere else." And actually, he might be right. We'll bring them from Sri Lanka, we'll bring them from Bangladesh, we'll bring them from whatever other country that is poorer than us, right? And so that the movement to build families of this lack of women in certain regions in the world will more or less be pushed to the poorest parts of the world. I believe that will probably happen. But the scale of this is enormous. The United Nations estimates that in India and southern China, we will have a dearth of women on the order, by 2040, of 80 million. That's 80 million families that don't form. I don't know what happens to those 80 million men. Do they form a military? Do they form a fraternity? You know, I mean, it's really going to be challenging to the world. The world has never seen this before. For China, you can see a little bit of this. The scale is so big because there are so many more people there. So there is an imbalance of boys and girls, but also there's this contraction associated with the one-child policy where, surprisingly, China is not growing as fast as other countries in the region. And when you read the Wall Street Journal or The Economist and you say, well, why are we so focused on GDP growth in China? We're so focused because we now know, economists know, that China, by the end of this century, will be smaller. By 2100, there will be less people in China than there are today. Almost hard to fathom. If you've been there and you've seen the mass of people, and you think this growth that they have, in part, has been fueled by people, but now those people are going to get older. And the concern is, how will that society look? At an individual level, it's become culturally very challenging for China because you have 4 grandparents that produce 2 parents that produce 1 grandchild. So you have 6 children on 1. Think about an ultra-millennial, okay? They call them little emperors, right? And this little emperor doesn't want to hang out in the village taking care of their 6, parents. He or she wants to move to the city, live in a condominium in a high-rise, right? Go to a good school, maybe even leave the country, right? And so that kind of pressure is at work in their society. And the parallel, or the canary in the coal mine, if you would, is Japan. This is what happens to a society that has no children and lives to 80 or 100 successfully. Their largest population group in the next decade will be people over the age of 80. Unbelievable, right? And Japan has lots of challenges, right? They're not a society that has particularly received immigrants well. That's the most polite way of saying it, okay? I remember going to Japan at the invitation of a good friend of mine who's Japanese, and he showed me all the sights, and we went to Yokohama, and Yokohama is where many of the Americans and expats live and have since Admiral Dewey opened up Yokohama as a port. And he says, Russ, you should go see the Foreigners' Cemetery. I said, really? Let's go. So we go, and there are tombstones to Americans and British and Portuguese. And I asked my friend, I said, why do you have a Foreigners' Cemetery? He said, oh, because it would not be good for them to mix with the Japanese. And I thought, wow, if you're dead and you can't mix with the Japanese, this is going to be a problem, okay? And it is possible for Japan to solve this in other ways. Instead of having a maid or a servant for another country, they have robots now. Literally, you're 80-year-olds, you got a robot that follows you around the house and makes your tea and reminds you to, take your pills or whatever you have to do, okay? Mexico, which you guys are probably very familiar with, is our solution to workplace or workforce addition. Interestingly, their number of men are lower than you would expect because they came across the border and we didn't count them here, okay? There's a tragedy in that, and I don't mean to raise any sort of controversial topic, but we need workers, they need work, and their disparity in where work and workers are aligned in the world has natural economic forces to bring them into alignment. And so that will change, that policy or how we interact will change, has the impact to change the world. The population forecast for the world by the UN, most recently updated in 2012, has us by the end of the century possibly as high as 16 billion, right? So you think about that, we're in the area of 7, and so we're talking about easily 50% increase in the population, probably doubling that, And we didn't bring this into focus today because it will probably be my children's generation that will deal with this. That growth isn't going to come from China. It'll come somewhat from India. Largely, it will be sub-Saharan Africa. So where are people being born in enormous numbers? Mothers who have 8, 10, 12 children. This still happens in sub-Saharan Africa. And so if you look at the world in 2100, I guess none of us will be here, but our children will be, they will deal with a very different world. And by 2050, many of us will be, the world will begin to look a lot like that, right? And so where we will find workers, where we will find customers, if you make goods or trade goods or anything like that for the kind of companies I work with, already the workforce is peaking and has peaked in the developed countries. The peaking will occur in the next decade in India. And of course, where you should think about all of this, bringing back the focus for your organization, for your dental practices, is to focus on the proposition that you can make to your workers, in particular to the new workers, the millennials, if you would. Look at the social professional development that you can offer them. Leverage that. It's not just about the pay. What else do you offer them? You might not be counting those as legitimate and strong benefits to your employees. Provide engagement opportunities where they can do things. And of course, in 10 years, they'll be taking over your practice, possibly buying it from you. Provide leadership and mentorship. I think we shared lots of examples on that. Many steps for advancement, how you can help them grow personally, professionally. Listen to them. What do they want? It may not be so hard to provide. So I hope this has provided you some opportunities to think about these changes. Again, as I mentioned, these changes will happen. We can't reverse them. But we can only prepare, alter our organizations, alter how we operate in society and even the world. So it's been very kind to have your attention today, to be with you. This is a little bit about what I do. If you're interested in my books or blogs, I'll talk about these topics and some others that are of interest to me. And I welcome any questions that you may have. Thank you so much.
We're a little ahead of schedule, so I encourage you to ask any questions you have of Dr. Walker. Anybody have a question or would like to ask of Dr. Walker?
Yes, sir.
A lot of your suggestions were for larger companies, and our case, we're all a small dental practice.
Yep.
And it's more of a hands-on operation than just medicine.
Right.
I just wanted you to have a few ideas on that.
Well, I think I appreciate that. I do see how it could be different, but I think that proximity would allow you to become a closer mentor to a younger person. And so if you're the practice owner and the dentist and you're mentoring a hygienist or a technician or even another dentist, having them watch what you're doing, you perhaps watching, and then, as I just said, alter the order of questions. Before you say, I saw the following, ask them what they saw. How did it go? How did it go for them? What could have been made better? What did they see as a challenge? And then offer your perspective, right? And it goes a long, long way. I know the general temptation, you're the owner, you're the boss, to say, hey, you should have done this first. You were slow at that or something like that. Turn it around. And it'll have a big impact on the relationship.
Any question?
I have a question.
Please.
A lot of the dynamics, and I know the title of the presentation is dealt with the workplace, but what about in regards to the patient?
Huge.
Ever-changing patient needs. Any comments on that?
Well, when I do this for the ADA in Chicago, the one comment that comes out a lot is that the millennials want to go to a Groupon, get a coupon, come into the dental office, get their cleaning for half off or whitening for half off or something like that. That there's a stronger sense of frugality amongst the millennials. What I do think is very dangerous, and you have to be cautious of in terms of the millennial generation, is their tendency to run to social media, to provide feedback on your practice, to go to Yelp and say, Dr. Jones was just so terrible and offered me the worst care, and I saw a roach in the back of the room, like make up stuff, right? And one of the ways that you prevent that is that you provide an opportunity for feedback while they're there. Ask them how it went, right? Could we have done anything better today? Are you happy? Are you satisfied? And just like the gentleman from the hotel was here, what could we do to make your your stay more enjoyable, I thought that was so impressive. Do the same thing. Right? You're not going to make it 0 complaints, okay? But you're going to take away the power that they believe they have. Hey, I can fire you as the dentist. I can change you, right? Change.org you, right? I'm going to alter it. I think that would be the biggest concern, and to train your staff to that their input, their questions are significant. You have to show that you've received it and show that you're taking action against it. It might even be the action is, I'm sorry, you may not be happy here, and we'd like to refer you to another practice. Let us know where we can send the files. That might be the right answer for some people. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Well, I'll at least draw some data that we see from corporate America. So this generation, let's just take my generation, my wife works, but many women in this generation, I'm making generalizations, so if anyone sees this as inappropriate, I don't mean it, have remained in the workforce, but as you said, in a part-time role or reduced their position because they're focusing on children and the family. And I still put that back on corporations, right? And I say it in this way. There's not really still a great solution for families, okay? And worse solution for fathers, okay, if I can just say honestly, right? So, the company will say, hey, mom wants to do halftime, okay, we got a program for that. If I went to my boss and said, hey, I'd like to go halftime, they're like, yeah, go 100% off. I mean, it doesn't work that way, So anyhow, until you have a real solution for the whole family, it's still a compromise. Really what I think is happening is families are saying, we're going to compromise some salary. That compromise is going to come from the mom, and we're going to try to work through that. If it were a practice, individuals, how do you allow both of them to be successful, to still grow their practice? Not easy, right? I mean, do you have care at home? Do you have daycare? And those have cost as well, right? I mean, a lot of corporations is not something that you could do necessarily at the practice, are investing in just that. The project, one of the studies I did for the World Bank, they were really concerned about attrition by their workers, and so they had, and everyone at the World Bank is someone important, right? At least they've been told that. So their female workforce desired to have child care on site, right? So they built a child care facility, and of course it speaks 12 languages, and that's an expense to the World Bank, but they couldn't keep their workers without that. I think solutions like that may not be available to an individual practice, but can you participate in kind of a consortium, emergency child care solutions, things like that? I think families will need. Maybe you've got some ideas, because you're. The other one that I'm sure people don't want to talk about, and you guys are probably more personally familiar with, is the cost to become a dentist. The amount of money that you've borrowed through dental school. Now you have 2 people who've done that, and the debt burden that you have. Maybe you have debt burden from undergrad. Kind of looks like some of my students, a large number, so then the pressure to service that debt's really high. Any other questions?
I've got one for you.
Yes.
You touched on it a little bit in your talk, but one of the things that we've invited some young dentists here today, and how you mentioned about organizations not being around because they're not catering to the younger generation.
Right.
What do you have some suggestions, specific suggestions that we can do to? I mean, we're taking a step in the right direction, I think, by inviting our young people here to see what the TDA offers. But any specifics that you could?
I think it's great that you're getting them involved, and I don't mean to speak for them. So I'm giving you the perspective that I would see from other organizations. Is offer them the opportunity to make the organization valuable to meet their needs, right? So if you're a young member, the temptation is, hey, this organization doesn't serve me, I pay a due, I go to a nice meeting, but I'm not getting something back, right? I'm not sure this applies to you, but I have seen it for other organizations, so they'll just say, let's go make our own organization, right? And it has happened, as I've been told, in dentistry, but in engineering and legal practices, and so whether they make a change.org or they just say, hey, we got a new club, a new organization, and then your organization sitting there with no new members, right? So then what their needs are have to be met. So appoint someone, give them a senior role. It may not be president, but whatever to address those. What should the organization do for new members? And you might have a challenge because you say, hey, when I was a new member, they didn't do that 20 years ago. But just ask yourself deeply, should they have? Would you have liked it? Probably you would have. Make your organization stronger that way. I see it, with our students, but I mean, like your question, sir, about dentists, okay, you say, well, maybe someone said, well, they didn't do that for us before. You say, well, should we do it now? Yeah, probably. Anything else?
Any other questions? We've got some time. There's one over here.
Please, we've got plenty of time. It, It's a great question, actually. It's similar to the kind of challenges we frequently get in the classroom. The professor doesn't know basic economics because I went to Wikipedia, right? Something like that, right? Okay, so when you have that challenge, and of course you're offering them clinical services, I think really the thing to do is to offer them a very crisp, clear diagnostic. Here is your condition. Here are the things I found. Show them the picture of the mouth, of the tooth. Show them other examples. I know this is starting to take time, and you're thinking, I'm not getting paid for this. Maybe they're not the right kind of customer for you. And whether you get into a debate about what they found on Google, but if you say, hey, you've got these following conditions or attributes, this is what I found. This is the recommended treatment. I'll share with you, I had orthodontic care late in life, and maybe I was a very inquisitive person, so I went and talked to lots of orthodontists, and the one who got my business is the one who laid all the conditions out, all the options, and said, here's why I'm recommending this for you, and I felt most comfortable by that. I believe that's how you address an educated, inquisitive person. And it doesn't mean that you have to alter your recommendation at all, right? Or even address what they might have found, but rather you address what you found. Doctors have that same challenge, by the way, so don't feel that you're left alone on that. Yes, sir?
How different do you see millennials, baby boomers from state to state? In Texas,
Oh.
are the attitudes of millennials any different here? California, New York, Florida?
I don't know if there's a study done on that, but what is clear is that there's a big difference in urban areas. And I'm going to guess that living in downtown Austin or Houston or something like that looks more like living in a big city in the Northeast than it does living in a suburb or rural area. And so a lot of the expectations of collaboration, how I should interact with my coworkers, even the political and ethic values that you should demonstrate, I think there's a strong tendency toward that. Yeah, there may be some differences. There's also individual differences. So naturally, what I've had to say today is a generalization. So it may not apply to individuals in every way, but it gives you a sense of certainly the direction of the generation. Yes, sir.
I had an experience just yesterday, as a matter of fact, that really demonstrated the chasm between baby boomer, and I'll admit I'm a baby boomer and probably somewhat jaded by our attitude towards millennials. But this is a young man that I just mentored, got into dental school and starting. He went to summer program and learned a little bit about the school
Right, right. No, exactly. Yeah. You should come teach. That's great. I like that. Yeah.
And my question, I guess, is do you find, because professional schools historically are very authoritative, and I think probably rightly so, because there's a certain expectation of these kids getting into professional schools. Should professional schools change their focus?
It's a great question. Actually, it was addressed, at least in the context of business schools, about a year and a half ago by the Wall Street Journal. They surveyed various deans of leading business schools. And they asked the question in this way: is the student a student or a customer? And, there was a surprising split between the deans. And a lot of them say, no, you're a student. You're here to learn. You're here to get a grade. And, if that's parallel with, say, a dental school, you're here to follow, a course. And then some say, hey, you paid $200,000, $300,000, and we're going to, be sure we make you successful. And there's some universities, even amongst business schools, who would say, well, you're a customer, and I'm here to help you in different ways and support you in different ways. And even they'll market themselves, say, hey, our classes only have 12 people in them, or our professors spend time with the students outside of class and things like that. It's a challenge. I mean, you should be honest about what your situation is. I do projects with a lot of my students, and sometimes, the way it works, of course, is the students do the work, and, I guide them, right? So this is a fantastic learning opportunity for them, and really rewarding opportunity for me. One time a student wrote and said, well, the professor doesn't do any of the work. I'm like, yeah, that's how it goes. And guess what? When you get in the corporate world and you work for a partner, the partner's not going to do any of the work. They're going to say, well, you build the PowerPoint, you do the spreadsheet, and I'll deliver it in front of the client. All right? And so that provides them a little rub. Like, they think that some of those senior people should be more hands-on. I see that. I know that's uncomfortable, right? You're like, that's a different set of expectations. Yeah. Other questions? Yes, sir. Yep. Yep. That's right. Oh, I totally agree. You have to be there when the patient's there. There may be certain times of the day, and maybe it's role specific. So if you have someone who does billing, or someone who is associated with cleaning the equipment or something like that, maybe that person says, hey, I need to have Wednesday morning off for a particular activity or family need. Could they make that work up by coming in earlier on other days? I don't believe that a dentist has that same type of flexibility, but some of those other roles may have those. Particularly when I worked at the bank, we had a lot of support staff, admins, secretaries, people like that. It wasn't necessary that they had to be there because of the nature of their role. So providing them that flexibility, it was sort of like a solution to the family needs. You still had to do 40 hours a week, but you could decide how to break that up. Maybe for a dentist, and I'm just giving you an idea, and I don't know if it works this way, maybe they don't want to be 100% all week. And my joke about, well, you earn less, that's true. Maybe they work on Saturdays as a makeup, right? Or they need a particular time off. It will be a challenge. It also, I think, especially for people with young kids, that magic hour between 4:30 and 5:30, right? Who gets the kid from daycare? How, all that. And I know what you do. A patient might be there, and you say, we have to have a solution. Do you have a solution to help with that? Is there a babysitter network that you can help them tie into? And I know that already sounds like outside your boundaries of responsibility, but it may not only be a few $100s, right? But you're helping close that gap. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Tell us.
I had a question. I'm trying to get
right?
But then this all seems to, does this baby boomer and all of these generational things, does that all transgress that? And should we rather, as an organization, be looking at these similarities that may be a unifying factor among these differences over here?
Oh, I love your question. I mean, I teach millennials, and it's an absolute joy, right? They're very dedicated, they're ambitious, they want to learn, they want to advance, they want to grow, all the things that we wanted. It's just that their approach to that, their expectations in doing that might be different. So I see it more as a fine-tuning so that you can overcome many of those unspoken misunderstandings and be more successful. I'm not suggesting that, that they're, less ambitious or want to work, any of those, but it's how you then, as the owner of the practice, the dentist, can just take that leadership role so you don't have those challenges.
And as a consensus builder, I'm in agreement with you. I'm seeing this maybe as a unifying factor
Sure.
that we could utilize as an organization to entice these groups in.
One of the things that I do with the teams that I have, these MBA teams that work with companies, so we do projects with large companies and small, and frequently the company will have a question, say, how do we answer this? And then the other thing that I will invite the students to do is I'll say, if you see something else that you think you have an idea on, offer that. How something can be changed. For instance, this resulted in a major airline here in the U.S. changing their webpage because we were doing some work for them, and how you made your reservation, and we were doing some analysis of the frequent flyer miles. And to be honest, the webpage was poor, right? No one had really pointed out to them, showed the functionality, and the ideas didn't come from other airlines. They came from places like Grubhub and Yelp and different kind of functionality. And so they built that kind of functionality into the webpage, right? So that kind of latitude to look to associates and say, tell us what you would do. Show us how you would do it. But do it with some latitude, not tell them, I want it done this way. I think that showing that trust is very valuable, important. Yes, ma'am.
Since you teach millennials, do you have a suggestion for how to ask for feedback or suggestions? So like we've sent out surveys to our younger members.
Oh, this is
from our
challenge.
dental society and things like that. And so, 15, 20%, response rates would be fantastic. Are you seeing any other applications or modes of which to engage them to get responses and feedback?
So there are a couple of things that I have seen that work. So what we do at the university, and you probably don't have this ability in a small practice, is naturally we do a written or an online process, and they can anonymously. It's kind of like Yelp. They can beat up the professor and tell them what they think, and so that's fine. So they feel empowered by that. But that's also beneficial. So then I can see what they think and know, and I get to review that. What I have seen work in corporations, especially in large settings and meetings, let's say we were to have this meeting and say, well, what went well? What didn't go well? Right? That they have an opportunity to voice that, but you're making them do it in the whole community. So then they can't just go off and be the wild, wild person, that their feedback is reasonable, it's appropriate, and respectful, without this kind of off-target feedback just to sort of fire you or something like that. I think in an intimate setting it's probably harder, right? Because they can't hide behind something. And I think this is why you'd have to work with some trust, in the practice. But if you had an organization, you should be able to poll people. I mean, survey. And what it may be, and I don't mean to, analyze your survey, but they might want to do it on a mobile phone, and maybe your survey doesn't have mobile capability. Or
We did a survey monkey for our, 750 dental society members.
yep.
So
And what
I
percent?
didn't know if there was a new innovative way.
Oh, what percentage rate did you get back?
Not to remember. 15%?
Oh, actually, by my experience in surveys, that's really high, actually. Yeah, most people don't conduct surveys or participate them, so getting 15% is quite respectable. Yeah, I mean the other, and I think Dr. Armstrong's right on. You're inviting people, just meet with them in person, right? And so, what can you learn from them? And then write that down, take it back, and say, is this something that we can, or make the offer back and say, if that's important to you, we'd like to help make that happen. Could you lead that for us? Could you help us make a difference there, right? And then they're part of the solution. I hope that helps. Sure.
No more questions? Thank you very much,
Thanks,
Dr.
guys.
Walker. Appreciate
Appreciate
it. Yep, thank you.
Thank you.